Imagine this. A man sits quietly in a crowded room. He speaks softly, nods often, and apologizes even when he hasn't done anything wrong. He's helpful, considerate, always puts others first. The kind of man society praises. But something's off. Behind his eyes there's weight, not sadness exactly, not anger either, something deeper, like a storm restrained behind glass. He's the kind of man who's never been taught how to say no without guilt, who's always been told that his power is dangerous, that masculinity must be tamed, who learned early that being good means being agreeable, pleasing, silent. So he adapts. He folds himself into shapes that make others comfortable. He cuts off pieces of himself for peace. He represses his instincts, questions his desires, and trades authenticity for approval. And the world claps for him, calls him evolved, says he's what men should be. But deep down, he's dying. From the weight of everything he's never said, from the fire he's been taught to smother, from the quiet humiliation of living without edges. Then one day something cracks. Maybe someone betrays him, maybe he loses everything, maybe it's something small, just enough to tip the balance. And suddenly the man who never raised his voice can't stop shaking. Something ancient wakes up in him, something raw, unapologetic, unfiltered, and for the first time, he feels alive. How does this happen? How does a man so good, so kind, so careful become something dangerous? Why does repression become rage? Why does silence turn into destruction? Why does a society that praises nice men secretly fear their awakening? And deeper still, what if the danger isn't in a man being powerful, but in a man being disconnected from his power? What if the very traits that made him safe are the same ones that made him empty? And what if the path to becoming whole, to becoming a force that the world both respects and fears, requires him to confront everything he's been taught to suppress? You think this story is rare? It's not. It's everywhere. The good man with clenched fists, the helper with a breaking heart, the gentle soul secretly wondering if he's weak or if the world is just wrong about strength. But here's the question that no one dares to ask. What if being good isn't enough? What if what the world really needs is for good men to become dangerous? Not reckless, not cruel, but dangerous in the way fire is dangerous. Focused, controlled, awake. Because maybe the most terrifying thing isn't a man who knows his rage. Maybe it's a man who never learned how to hold it. And that's where we begin. Let's step into the shadow. You've been told to be good, polite, emotionally available, soft enough to be liked but stable enough to be leaned on. Always in control, never controlling. You've been told anger is dangerous, desire is toxic, ambition must be tamed. You've been told that masculinity, real masculinity, is outdated, that your instincts are flawed, that if you want to be accepted, you have to be less. So you adapt, you shrink your voice, you second-guess your impulses, you apologize for your presence in spaces that were built to erase you, and it works. For a while, people approve. You're safe, you're good, but deep beneath the calm surface, a slow corrosion begins. Because here's the truth, a man cannot live disconnected from his instinct, his boundaries, or his fire, without also disconnecting from his purpose, his identity, and his soul. Carl Jung said, "Every man carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." In other words, the more you repress, the more you fragment. Every no you didn't say, every rage you buried, and every truth you swallowed to keep the peace, it doesn't disappear. It waits, and it gathers strength in the dark. The world calls you good for hiding it, but what it's really doing is neutering you. Not because you're dangerous, but because you could be. And that potential, that untapped power, terrifies a world built on compliant men. Let's be clear. This isn't about justifying violence or celebrating uncontrolled aggression. This is about the psychic decay that occurs when a man's primal energy is pathologized instead of harnessed. Nietzsche said, "The man who fights too long against dragons becomes a dragon himself." But what if the man who refuses to fight at all becomes something worse? A ghost, living, but not alive, breathing, but disconnected, smiling but numb. You see it all the time. The man who over-explains himself, terrified to offend. The man who people-pleases until he's invisible. The man who suppresses desire until it mutates into shame. The man who tries so hard to be liked that he forgets how to be real. These men aren't weak. They are wounded by a society that punishes masculine expression while still expecting men to be protectors, providers, and rocks for everyone else. They are walking contradictions, told to be strong but never express strength, told to be kind but never firm, told to lead but never dominate, told to feel but not too much. And eventually, something snaps, because no man can hold that much contradiction without shattering. No man can live in exile from his inner fire forever. And when it breaks, that's when a good man becomes dangerous. Not because he wants to destroy, but because he finally realizes he was never meant to be safe. He was meant to be whole, integrated, balanced, both lion and lamb, protector and destroyer, capable of violence but committed to virtue. Seneca warned, "Anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it." But notice, he never said to eliminate anger. He said to restrain it, to own it, to discipline it. That's where danger becomes power. So now the question is, can a man walk through his own shadow without becoming consumed by it? Can he reclaim his instincts, his aggression, his masculine clarity, and still choose to use it wisely? The answer is yes, but only if he's willing to do what few ever dare to do. Stop being good and start becoming whole. In the next section, we'll explore how this transformation happens. How a man moves from repressed and broken to focused, grounded, and dangerous in the most sacred sense of the word. Because the world doesn't need more safe men. It needs men who are powerful enough not to hide anymore. So what happens when a man stops running from his shadow? When he stops apologizing for his instincts, stops begging for permission to exist, and starts turning inward toward the very thing he was told to suppress? He transforms, not into a tyrant, not into a brute, but into something far more dangerous. A man who knows his own power and chooses how to wield it. At first, it's terrifying, because all the feelings he buried start rising. The anger, the grief, the hunger, the rage. But then something miraculous happens. They stop controlling him, because they're no longer in hiding. Carl Jung called this integration. He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is how a man becomes whole again. He stops fearing his fire. He learns to contain it, to channel it, to choose it instead of being consumed by it. This transformation looks different on every man, but it always follows the same rhythm. He begins to set boundaries, not because he's mean, but because he's no longer afraid of confrontation. He stops chasing approval, because he's no longer dependent on being seen as nice. He walks away from people who drain him, because he's finally honoring his energy. He speaks with fewer words, but more weight. He leads without asking for permission. He listens, but he doesn't tolerate manipulation. He loves, but not at the cost of his own self-respect. This man becomes anchored, not reactive, not chaotic, but centered, clear, and fully embodied. And that kind of man, you can feel him when he enters a room. You don't know what he's thinking, but you know he's aware, not trying to impress you, not trying to dominate you, just fully rooted in who he is. That is the essence of dangerous calm. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while writing about fear, discipline, and death every single night. He once wrote, "Look well into thyself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if thou wilt always look." That's the fountain we've forgotten. We don't need to manufacture power. We need to remember it. It was never gone. It was buried beneath years of shame, fear, guilt, and conditioning. The dangerous man, the integrated man, doesn't seek to control others. He controls himself. He doesn't fear rejection. He chooses connection with discernment. He doesn't explode in rage. He uses anger as a signal, not a weapon. He doesn't act from ego, but from clarity. And this transformation, it's not a fantasy, it's a process. It starts the moment a man says, "I'm done performing. I'm done pleasing. I'm done being half of myself to make others feel whole." The truth is, you can't be good for the world if you've betrayed yourself to be accepted by it. And you can't be trusted with power if you've never dared to hold it. A dangerous man is not feared because he hurts others. He's feared because he can, but doesn't. He's feared because his strength is voluntary, his restraint is intentional, and his presence is a reflection of everything you cannot manipulate. This is the man the world quietly respects but rarely encourages. Because he cannot be easily used, he cannot be guilted, he cannot be distracted from his path, and most of all, he cannot be broken. In the next and final section, we'll explore the awakening, what this means for your life, starting now, how to take the first step toward becoming that kind of man, because the world may not need more nice men, but it's begging for men who are awake, whole and powerful again. The awakening, becoming a man the world cannot break. You've heard the voice inside you, not the one begging for validation, not the one terrified of rejection, not the one you've trained to be quiet just to survive, but the deeper one, the one that speaks in silence, the one that watches when you betray yourself to fit in, the one that rises when you're alone and finally honest. That voice is not polite. It doesn't care what people think. It doesn't care what society calls toxic or acceptable. It only wants one thing, to bring you back to yourself. You were never meant to be a shell. You were never meant to be passive, soft, compliant. You were meant to walk this world with a spine, with fire, with grounded power that doesn't need to shout, because it's undeniable. That doesn't come from rage, it doesn't come from domination, it comes from integration. You've seen the weak version of yourself. You've lived it. The version that waits, that avoids conflict, that buries his truth, that lets others define him. Now it's time to meet someone else. The version of you that no longer asks for permission. The man who feels his anger and doesn't collapse under it. The man who sees his darkness and doesn't run from it. The man who accepts his flaws and doesn't let them define him. You want to know what makes a man unbreakable? It's not muscles. Not money, not dominance. It's this, self-possession. The ability to sit with everything you are, without flinching. The discipline to lead yourself when no one is watching. The strength to be feared, not because you're cruel, but because you can't be controlled. When the world can't control you, it labels you as dangerous. That's fine. Let them. Because the world doesn't need more obedient men. It needs men who are anchored in truth, capable of force and governed by principle. That's what makes a man formidable. So here's your moment. Right now, not tomorrow, not after the next crisis, not when you feel ready. Now, to stop hiding behind being nice, to stop suppressing your edge, to stop apologizing for existing. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be whole. You need to remember that the fire inside you, the one you feared would burn the world, was never meant to be extinguished. It was meant to be mastered, so master it. Not just for you, for every version of you that stayed quiet when he wanted to scream, for every moment you abandoned yourself to be liked, for every time you doubted your strength because the world told you to. This is your awakening, and if you listen closely, you'll hear that voice again. Not shouting, not begging, just steady. Wake up, rise up, become the man you were never supposed to be. The world doesn't need more good men, it needs more dangerous ones, whole, grounded, awake. And if you're still here, it means you're already becoming one.